My name is Grace Whitfield, and the last time my father looked at me with anything close to love, I was 9 years old. I'm 26 now, and today, I'm going to tell you about the day I walked into a Sacramento County courtroom wearing a $500 blazer I bought with my own money, sat down at a table across from the man who abandoned me, and watched his lawyer's face go the color of printer paper. This is a story about a father who threw away his daughter because she wasn't useful to him anymore. It's about the 11 years I spent building myself back up from nothing. And it's about the one afternoon everything I built came due, all at once, in front of a judge who had no idea she was about to watch a masterclass in poetic justice. Stick with me to the end, because the moment his lawyer realized who I was, that's the part you're not going to forget. I grew up in a small town outside Modesto, California. My father, Richard Whitfield, ran a mid-sized construction company that he'd built from nothing, and for the first 9 years of my life, I thought he hung the moon. He'd take me to job sites on Saturdays, let me wear his hard hat, buy me a strawberry milkshake on the way home. I was his shadow. Then my mother got sick, ovarian cancer, stage 3 by the time they caught it, and I watched my father change in real time, not into someone grieving, but into someone calculating. He hired a home health aide within 2 weeks, not because he cared about my mother's comfort, but because he'd already started seeing another woman, a bookkeeper named Denise who worked at his company, and he needed my mother's care handled so he wouldn't have to be the one handling it. My mother died when I was 10. My father remarried Denise before the first anniversary of her death. Denise did not want a stepdaughter. She made that clear in every way a grown woman can. Make a 10-year-old feel like an inconvenience. The extra play settings she'd forget. The vacations where I stayed with my aunt. The way she'd refer to me as Richard's daughter instead of using my name, like I was a line item he hadn't fully paid off yet. And my father let it happen. Worse than let it happen, he leaned into it. Because agreeing with Denise was easier than protecting me. And by then, protecting me had stopped being a priority. By the time I was 14, I was living with my Aunt Carol full-time. Not because there was some dramatic blow-up, there wasn't. It was quieter and colder than that. My father simply stopped showing up, stopped calling. When I graduated high school, he sent a card. No visit, just a card, and inside it, $40. I want you to sit with that for a second, because it matters for what comes later. $40. That's what my childhood was worth to him, apparently. Once he'd built a new one with someone else. Aunt Carol was not a wealthy woman. She was a school librarian in a town where school librarians got paid about what you'd expect. But she gave me the one thing my father never did. She showed up. Every parent-teacher conference, every terrible community theater production I got cast in, every panic attack about college applications. I got a partial scholarship to UC Davis for business and finance. I worked 2 jobs to cover the rest, hosting at a diner on weekends and doing data entry for a small property management firm during the week. That property management job is where the story actually starts to turn, though I didn't know it yet. The man who owned that firm, a guy named Walter Nguyen, saw something in me. He started teaching me how commercial leases worked, how contracts got structured, how disputes got resolved before they ever reached a courtroom. I was 20 years old, exhausted, sleeping 4 hours a night, and completely obsessed with the idea that if I understood contracts well enough, no one could ever blindside me the way my father had blindsided my mother. By 23, I had my degree and a job as a junior contracts analyst at a construction and development firm in Sacramento, ironically. The same industry my father worked in, just a different company. A better one, run by people who didn't cut corners. By 25, I'd been promoted twice. I was leading contract negotiations for projects worth tens of millions of dollars. I'd learned to read a document the way some people read a room, spotting the clause that was designed to bury a liability, the deadline that was quietly unreasonable, the language built to protect one party while looking like it protected both. I want to be clear. I wasn't building this career to get back at my father. I genuinely didn't think about him much anymore. Aunt Carol used to say the best revenge is a life he doesn't get to be part of. And I believed her. I'd made peace, or at least something that looked like peace from the outside. Then, 11 months ago, my phone rang, and it was a number I hadn't seen in over a decade. It was my father, Richard Whitfield, 61 years old now, and I found out fast in serious financial trouble. Turns out his construction company had taken on a massive commercial development contract 2 years earlier, a mixed-use retail and residential project in the Central Valley. And turns out my father, never the most careful reader of fine print, had signed a contract with a development partner that included a personal guarantee clause when the project ran over budget and behind schedule, largely because of shortcuts his own company had taken. The development partner sued not just the company, him personally, his house, his retirement accounts, everything he and Denise had built, all exposed. And somehow, through the grapevine of a small industry, he'd heard that his daughter, the one he hadn't spoken to in 11 years, was now a contract specialist at a respected firm in Sacramento. He didn't call to apologize. He didn't call to explain himself. He called to ask if I would review his contract and, in his words, help fix this mess for the family. I almost hung up. I actually did hang up the first time. He called back for more times that week. What finally made me pick up wasn't forgiveness. It was curiosity. I wanted to see the contract. Partly professional instinct, partly something raw that I didn't examine too closely at the time. He emailed it to me that same night, and I read it start to finish twice at my kitchen table at 11 o'clock at night. And I found something. Not a way to save him. The personal guarantee was airtight. He'd signed it himself. No one had forced his hand. But I found something else. A pattern. The development partner suing him, a company called Bramwell Capital Partners, had used nearly identical contract language in at least 2 other lawsuits I could find public records for smaller contractors in the past 3 years. Same aggressive personal guarantee clause, same vague completion standard language that was almost impossible to satisfy, same pattern of pushing partners toward default and then collecting far more in the lawsuit than the original contract was worth. It wasn't illegal, but it was predatory. And it was systematic. And it meant my father wasn't just careless, he'd been targeted. The way you target someone who's proud and won't ask for a second opinion before signing. I didn't tell him what I found. Not yet. Instead, I did something else. I called the 2 other contractors I could identify from the public case filings. I asked them a handful of quiet questions about how they'd ended up in their own lawsuits. What I got back confirmed the pattern completely. Here's the honest answer, the one I've had to sit with myself. I did not show up in that courtroom to save my father. I showed up because somewhere in reviewing those contracts, I stopped thinking about Richard Whitfield the man, and started thinking about the 11-year-old, the 8-year-old, anyone who trusted the wrong signature on the wrong page. I'd spent my whole career since college getting good at exactly one thing: reading contracts, so predatory ones couldn't be used against people. And here was the single largest predatory contract I'd personally ever laid eyes on, and it happened to have my father's name on it. I reached out to his defense attorney, a tired, overworked solo practitioner named Marcus Feld, who was clearly out of his depth against Bramwell's corporate legal team. I offered him what I'd found, the pattern across the other lawsuits, the language analysis, the contractors willing to testify about the tactics used against them. I didn't do it as his daughter. I did it as an expert witness. I made him put that in writing. Actually, that I would appear as a professional consultant on contract patterns, not as family, and that it changed nothing about our relationship. He agreed immediately. He was desperate. My father did not know I was coming. Felt thought it would be better that way, better for my credibility. Better so it didn't look staged. So the first time Richard Whitfield saw me in 11 years was when I walked into that courtroom in Sacramento County Superior Court, sat down at the defense table, and opened a leather folio full of annotated contracts. He looked older than I expected, grayer. When he saw me, his face did something complicated: surprise, then something that might have been hope. Then, when I didn't so much as nod at him, something closer to the old irritation. I remembered from being 14 and inconvenient. "What is she doing here?" he muttered to Feld, not quietly enough. "She's your expert witness," Feld said. "Be grateful." My father actually laughed. Quiet, but I heard it. "She barely finished a business degree at a state school," he said. "What's she going to do? Read them a spreadsheet?" I let that sit. I've had a lot of practice letting things sit. Bramwell Capital's legal team was sharp 3 attorneys, led by a senior partner named Alan Grow, the kind of lawyer who has a reputation for making solo practitioners fold before lunch. He opened by walking through the personal guarantee clause line by line, establishing correctly that my father had signed it, that he'd had the opportunity to have counsel review it, that the completion standards were, in Grow's words, industry standard and unambiguous. Then it was our turn. Feld called me to the stand. I walked past my father without looking at him. I took the oath, and then, for the next 40 minutes, I did the thing I'd spent 6 years training myself to do. I walked the court through the completion standard clause and demonstrated, using the contract's own defined terms, that it was internally contradictory. That Section 4.2 defined substantial completion one way, and Section 9.1 measured penalties against a different, stricter definition that made compliance with 4.2 functionally impossible without incurring penalties under 9.1. I showed that this exact structural flaw appeared, nearly word for word, in 2 other Bramwell contracts currently in litigation, and that in both cases, Bramwell's own project managers had internal emails, which I'd obtained through the other contractors' discovery requests, now entered as exhibits, acknowledging the standard couldn't realistically be met. In plain terms, Bramwell wasn't writing contracts that could be honored. They were writing contracts designed to be broken, so they could collect the personal guarantee. Alan Gross stood up to cross-examine me, clearly expecting to dismantle a 26-year-old with a state school degree in about 90 seconds. It didn't go that way. He asked me to explain my qualifications. I did 6 years in contract negotiation and dispute resolution, over $200 million in reviewed commercial contracts. No formal legal degree, but extensive documented experience the court could verify. He asked if I had any personal relationship with the defendant. That might bias my testimony. And this is the moment. This is the one you're waiting for. I said, yes. Richard Whitfield is my father. We have not spoken in 11 years, until he contacted me 11 months ago asking for help with this exact contract. The courtroom went quiet in that specific way courtrooms go quiet when something unscripted just happened. Grow recovered fast. He tried to use it, suggested my testimony was compromised by an obvious personal agenda to rehabilitate a estranged relationship. Reasonable move. I'd have made the same one. I answered calmly, with respect, if I wanted to help my father. The easiest thing I could have done 11 months ago was nothing at all. I'm here because I reviewed a contract, recognized a pattern I'd flag in any client's dispute, and confirmed that pattern independently with 2 other contractors who had no connection to my father whatsoever. My analysis doesn't change because of who's sitting at that table. If anything, your client should be more concerned that this pattern is well documented, enough that a family estrangement didn't stop me from finding it. That's when I saw it happen. Alan Grow sharp, composed, expensive. Alan Grow went still. He looked down at the exhibit list, then back up at me, and something shifted in his expression. Not defeat exactly, recognition. Like he was doing math on how much worse this was about to get. Because a witness with a grudge is easy to discredit. A witness who'd clearly buried her grudge in favor of the actual facts was a nightmare. He leaned over and whispered something to his co-counsel. I watched his co-counsel's face go pale. I found out afterward, from Feld, what he'd said. My God, is that really her? She's the one who flagged the Kowalski contract pattern. Turns out I wasn't a complete unknown to Bramwell's legal team. 8 months earlier, in an unrelated matter, I'd been brought in by my own firm to consult on a supplier dispute, and, in the course of that work, I'd flagged the exact same structural flaw in a different Bramwell contract, one involving a contractor named Kowalski, which had quietly settled before trial specifically because Bramwell's counsel didn't want that language pattern examined in open court. They knew my name. They knew my work. They just hadn't connected Grace Whitfield, the contracts analyst, to Grace Whitfield, the estranged daughter sitting across from them, until I said it out loud myself. The judge didn't rule that same afternoon. These Things rarely wrap up as neatly as television makes it look, but she granted our motion to compel discovery into Bramwell's full litigation history, and 2 weeks later, a business reporter for the Sacramento Bee who'd been quietly tracking small contractor lawsuits picked up the story. Not my father's case specifically at first, the pattern. Predatory personal guarantee clauses in Central Valley construction contracts. The headline read, and it named Bramwell Capital Partners directly, cited the Kowalski case, cited two others, and cited an ongoing case involving contractor Richard Whitfield of Whitfield Construction. That article did something no courtroom ruling could have. It went out to every contractor, every subcontractor, every banker in the region who'd ever done business with Bramwell or with my father. Overnight, Bramwell Capital wasn't just facing one lawsuit anymore. 3 other contractors, who'd quietly settled and signed NDAs, started asking their own attorneys whether those NDAs could be challenged. Bramwell's stock, they were a private equity-backed firm, but their bonds were public, took a real hit within the week. 6 weeks after that, Bramwell settled with my father, and settled fast, because the last thing they wanted was a public trial building on a public news story. He still lost real money. The lake house went. Some retirement accounts got liquidated, but he kept his primary residence. And the settlement forced Bramwell to rewrite the completion standard clause across every active contract they held. 2 contractors I'd spoken with personally got to reopen their own settlements under the new precedent. That's the part I actually care about. Not what happened to my father, what happened to Bramwell. In public, where it counted, where people in his industry, his old friends, his golf buddies, the men who used to shake his hand at the county permit office, got to read exactly how close he'd come to losing everything, and exactly whose name was on the filing that stopped it. I found out what happened to Denise the way you find out most things about people who used to matter to you secondhand. Weeks later, from someone who wasn't trying to hurt you with the news, just reporting it. Denise filed for divorce 9 days after the settlement was finalized. Not before, not during the worst of it, when my father actually needed someone standing next to him. After once it was clear the house was smaller, the accounts were thinner, and the man she'd married was going to spend the next several years rebuilding instead of coasting. And Carol heard it from a cousin who still lived near Modesto. Denise had already moved in with a man she'd met through her sister. Someone with money. Someone who hadn't just had his name in the newspaper. I won't pretend I felt sorry for her. For 11 years, Denise made it clear that I was only worth as much as I was convenient. And it turns out that's exactly the deal she made with my father too. She just didn't expect to be on the losing end of that math herself. When my father told me, on one of our short phone calls, his voice did something I hadn't heard from him before. Not anger, just tired recognition. She only wanted me when I was easy, he said. I did the same thing to you and never once called it what it was. I didn't say anything for a second. Then I said, I know. It was the closest he'd ever come to actually saying it out loud outside the courthouse. After the hearing, before any of the Bramwell news broke, my father tried to hug me. I let him, but only for a second, because what happened next surprised me more than the hug did. He didn't let go right away, and when he finally stepped back, his eyes were wet. And for the first time in 11 years, my father actually looked at me instead of at what I could do for him. I don't have a good excuse, he said. His voice cracked on the word excuse. I told myself for years that you were fine, that Carol had you, that she didn't need me the way your mother needed me to be there for her. That was a lie I built so I wouldn't have to feel what I'm feeling right now. I traded you for an easier life, Grace. I know that. I've known it for a long time, and I never had the nerve to say it to your face. I let him say it. I didn't rescue him from the silence after. I'm not asking you to forgive me today, he said. I don't think I've earned a single day of your time, let alone forgiveness. I just needed you to hear me say it wasn't your fault. None of it. Not one day of it. That's the version of my father I'd waited 11 years to meet. And he showed up exactly once too late to undo anything. But not too late to say it plainly. Without excuses. Without an ask attached. I told him I hurt him. I told him it changed something. even if it didn't change everything. And then I told him what I'd been rehearsing without realizing it, that I didn't do any of this to get a father back. I did it because I was good at my job, and what happened to him was wrong the same way it would have been wrong if it happened to a stranger. But that, hearing him finally say it out loud mattered more than he probably understood. I didn't go home after that. I drove straight to Aunt Carol's house, the one with the same porch swing that had been there since I was 14, and she was on it, reading, like she somehow knew I'd come. She stood up before I even got out of the car, and when I reached her, I didn't say a single word about the courtroom, or Bramwell, or my father. I just put my head on her shoulder the way I used to when I was 14, and scared and certain no one else in the world was going to show up for me. "You did good, baby," she said, and I felt her hand on the back of my head, and I finally let myself cry, not for my father, not for the case, but for every single Tuesday she drove 40 minutes to a parent-teacher conference for a kid who wasn't legally hers, because nobody else was going to. "You're the one who raised the woman who walked into that courtroom," I told her. "Not him. You." She just held on tighter. That was answer enough. I didn't need my father's approval to become who I am. Aunt Carol built that in me, one ordinary Tuesday at a time, long before any courtroom ever needed me to prove it. Richard Whitfield thought his daughter walked in to rescue him. She walked in already rescued. She just brought the paperwork. And she went home too. The woman who actually raised her. If this story hit home for you, you know exactly why. Sometimes the best revenge isn't a scene. It's a life so solid that when the people who doubted you finally need you, they're the ones left speechless. And the people who actually loved you are the ones you run to first.